Okay,
but we're going live now.
good.
And I will broadcast, which means that we will allow in anybody who is attendees. Hey, Christian. Oh,
Mark, are we supposed to put our name in the chats? You know,
yeah, that would be a good idea. Thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Actually,
yeah?
you know what, I did forget that. That's for the kids that are in 3 to, I think, 3 to 8.
Okay, so what do we do? We just add our names?
Just type your name.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, maybe doing that. Yeah. That might be helpful.
Let me see, I thought I promoted.
So all of us type our name in chat?
Yes, please.
Okay. Where?
Just enter chat and then type your name. Okay, so all the people who are attendees were actually board members. So I have basically promoted all of them. Rich, can I ask you to be co-host?
Sure.
Thank you.
Come on up. Okay, she's joining us. This is Nosy Rosie Beatty. And she's
Hi,
joining
Nosy
us.
Rosie.
Hello.
I've got my cats.
hello.
She's not happy.
Sweet girl.
I have my turtle.
You do.
Okay. So I leave it to the co-secretaries to figure out who's doing minutes. Do you need a minute?
Yeah.
Ah, that's a good one.
I just sent both of you a doc. I can take minutes today.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Julian. Hey, Julian, while we're just about to get started here, one of the members of the Board of Regents with whom YEL and a few others of us spoke last Friday is interested in speaking with people about your age. Would you be willing to be connected with Nan Mead of the Board of Regents?
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
she was excited to hear about you too. So I'll make that shadok later, but thank you. That's
Thank you.
yeah. Well, it is 6:30 by my clock, and rather than punish the people who got here on time, I will punish the people who get here late. So thank you all for joining Steering Committee for May. I'm Mark Diller. I'm the chair of Community Board 7 for those listening on YouTube or wherever you may be at the ships at sea. I was going to do a welcome to our new members, but I don't see any of our new members on the call just now. So with your permission, what I will do is move on, and then if and when they join us, we will take a moment and say hello then. Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
Great. So last month we embarked upon a different organization for the full board meeting by Zoom. Essentially, we flipped the public and business sessions, started the business session actually pretty promptly at 6:30. That was pretty great that we were able to get out right off the bat. It lasted a little bit longer than we thought, but not much longer. I think we were done by 7:10 or 7:15. And so the first thing I want to ask the consensus here, and I'm not too concerned whether it's just steering members or others because everybody is affected by it, is do we want to do that again? I'm perfectly willing to do it, but I'm also willing to go back to the other way of doing things. What do we think?
I think
Linda, go ahead.
Susan, Susan, we had a thing
You're freezing up there a little bit.
about voting reach, and that's how it should be done. However, let me say this, if we've got a short agenda I don't have a problem with, voting, if it's only, 5 or 6 agenda items collectively, I don't have a problem voting at the end, but because I can still recollect everything. But if it doesn't comport to the bylaws, that's a different story.
Well, so I'm actually sort of separating out 2 different issues there, Linda. So to
Okay.
clarify, the first question I'm asking right now is whether we want to do the reversal of our usual practice of having the business session follow the public session. Last month, or this month, I should say, the month of May, we had the business session first. So right now I'm just asking, do we want to do that again for June? I'm perfectly willing to.
Absolutely.
I see Clary has her hand up. Thank you for that. If you're commenting on that, please go ahead. Do I have to unmute you? No, you can do it. Okay.
No, hi. So, yeah, first of all, I mean, it had been my suggestion the last time and I was glad that it was adopted. I think it worked. I would favor doing it again. What I would add to that is that maybe these Zoom sessions are sort of more stressful or more wearying or something, but somehow the last full board meeting after our business session again seemed to be sort of longer and more wearying than one had hoped. So I am still all for getting our business work agenda done first. And I know without making too big a deal out of it, because I hope it will not be a big deal, but we did have a joint resolution from the Transportation and Parks and Environment Committee that was not by any means unanimous. And I suspect is going to result in some discussion.
Whoever that is, could they please mute that? Thank you. All right, Clary, thank you. I see a couple more hands. We'll just call on them in the order I see them. So Christian, you're next.
Yeah, I'm in favor of doing the business session first again. One of the things with the Zoom meetings is that with the public section is that we potentially can get more people that we might normally get at regular meetings. They take longer. And this way we can just get the business out of the way and we take however long it takes to do the public session.
Whoops. Okay, is that Christian? You're muted now. Can you?
Yes.
You're all set. Okay.
Yeah.
Roberta, I see you next, and then Sarah. Roberta, can you unmute? Oh no. Okay. So let's go to Sarah. Oh,
I
are you
unmuted.
with us, Roberta? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was a problem unmuting. So I think we should do the business session first. And if we're talking about voting, I think.
We're not yet. Hold that thought, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's just get the one thing done. Sarah, why don't you, I have your hand up. Louisa, I see your physical hand.
I
Yeah.
was just reviewing the agenda to see, I mean, I think what we talked about last month, I would like to do the business session first, but we did talk about if we thought the business session was going to go too long, that it was maybe not kind to the public to make them sit through things, or I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking at it. I think what we did last time was have like a time that we were going to hope to be done with the business session by. So maybe if we did something like that.
Okay. Great, thank you. Other hands raised. I think I see Louisa's had her physical hand raised, and then I see Rich Robbins has his hand raised, Elizabeth, and then Barbara. Oh, and then Stephen. Okay, so let's take those hands in that order. So Louisa, you're next.
Okay, I'm in favor of the business portion first because I think it's easier for the public who are tuning in to hear about specific issues, and they don't have to wait and wait and wait until we get a lot of announcements taken care of first. And so it's fair to them, and I think it worked very well.
Very good. Elizabeth, you're next.
Great. I agree on the business session first. I also think that perhaps we can divide when we talk about the public session, separating the true public that is coming to a meeting versus the elected officials who are giving at many times 5 to 10 minutes each, repeating things that are happening in Albany that other I mean, this happened when I was chair. I think we need to really coach these folks when they come to a meeting. People are tired at the end of the day. I think we all want to hear from our elected officials, but this is not a town hall for them. So my recommendation would be that we really try to coach our elected officials and be mindful of their time.
So thank you for that. You didn't see it because it was behind the scenes, but I sent a 2-page memo to all the staffers of all the elected officials that come last month, including proposing topics that they might want to touch on that are local and relate to business and issues right here in our community, as opposed to the undeniable hassle of dealing with Republicans in Congress. That's
So we're not a political entity, and this isn't it's not a political meeting. So like, I feel like.
So I was trying to.
Yeah. We all want to hear from Jerry Nadler when he comes. So I know that's an exception, but for some of these local electeds, when they get out of Albany and they want to come and talk about all the great work they did, that's awesome. But it's also like, they can put it in a memo, they can email it, they can save paper and, send us an email about all the great work they're doing.
There's a limit to what I can do, but I have already tried it once and I will try it again before next meeting. I will also suggest that, so what do we think? So I see some more hands. So far, we're pretty much in unanimous agreement that the business session should come first. We'll talk, okay, so I'll still call on the hands, but in terms of the public session, if those who are waiting to comment on that will also opine, what we ought to do is set a time for when we think we'll be done with the business section, give the public an idea of when they should speak, and then maybe tell the electeds a half an hour after that. What do you think? So now I've got 2 questions in front of you and I'm breaking my own rule, but let's go. I think I had Barbara Adler next. And then I know that Shelley Fine has his physical hand up. I see Stephen Brown and Jay Adolph, so perhaps in that order. So Barbara, you're next.
So I also think that the business session is much better coming first. And also the point that Michelle made last time at steering, which I thought was really important, that at the end of a very long meeting, those resolutions that are coming up get really short shrift, especially when they're controversial, because it's just too late. A lot of people have left, etc.
Yeah, the flip side to that, Barbara, of course, is that by the time the elected speak, everybody else may have left the room, and that's not good good for our position in the community either. But maybe we can have some sort of balancing act. And I think Zoom is the perfect opportunity to try some of these things out and see what happens. So let's all commit ourselves to sticking around, which everybody did a great job of at the May full board meeting. There's no accusation implicit in what I'm saying. It's just that it does change the challenge it shifts the challenge from one place to another. I see Shelley, and then I think I had Jay and Stephen, and now I see Doug Kleiman has joined us as well. And Rich, I'm sorry, Rich as well. Go ahead, Shelley.
I've been to about 6 different community boards around the city at different times, in 3 different boroughs, and everybody starts with the business session. Okay, I was shocked because it was consistent. When the public comes, they have a right to speak. But if the business session, the public can speak about the issues on the agenda, and the agenda is what we're all about. So I think that's crucial. To deal with the time element, perhaps we can designate a certain amount of time for an issue. Okay, try to keep to it. We can extend it if it seems to be necessary. But I think if we say we have 10 minutes for this issue, then we may stick to 15 minutes of the issue. But sometimes things can go on for an hour, and then we realize that only 2 people had a strong feeling about it, and the argument was going on for an hour. So I think if we put some time limits on items, we'll be able to have a more efficient meeting, but I think business goes first. That's what we're all about.
Thank you, Shelley. So Jay, I think you're next. I missed Rich Robbins because his hand can only go up physically. So let's go in that order. I see Stephen Brown and Doug Kleiman in that order, please, Jay.
Can you guys hear me?
You're all set. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I agree with doing the business session first. And I agree wholeheartedly with Elizabeth that we need to limit the time allotted to our public officials who aside from the community board, are constantly communicating with their constituents, with newsletters, et cetera. So they have that opportunity. And I think, Mark, if you could somehow at least strongly suggest to them a time limit on their comments. And this way, if they are offended, it'll be by you and not the rest of us.
Well, I always know you have my best interest at heart, Jay, so thank you very much for that. Rich, I'm going to go to you next, and then I've got Stephen Brown and Doug Kleiman.
Yeah, I think the reason that we're all unanimous is because the electeds have abused the privilege and the public can speak too much as well. I do think there are advantages, especially if we have really long meetings, to have people speak up front. But we could put conditions and say, if an elected wants to speak before the business session, they get 1 minute or maybe 2 minutes. It has to be the elected, not a staffer. And for members of the public, they could email in advance and say what the issue is. And Mark, you could decide if it's worthy of putting a select few up front, but then having the rest of public comments and the electeds at the end. But given the way it has been, I think we have no choice because it's just dragged on way too long. But I do think there are creative solutions that could preserve some of the benefit without throwing it all away. And if we do have a 3-hour meeting, I think having people speak after that would be pointless.
Thanks. So let's keep going, and then I'll try to sum up. I think I had Stephen Brown next, followed by Doug Kleiman, and now I see Cindy Cardinal's hand. So, and then let's wrap this up because this is item 1. And we seem to be in agreement on the question I posed. So,
yeah, I mean, I'll be very brief. I agree with the majority, what everyone has said. I think there's no perfect agenda, right? I mean, all these things are important, but I think that this agenda is very much sort of puts our priorities in better order to what I think should be, what we should be doing. And, I'd be happy to help you, Mark, if you get hassled, unlike Jay. Just so.
I'll put you guys together on that. Doug, I think you're next. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I agree. Good to see you too. Good. I agree with a lot that was said. I like, Shelley's points. I think that the business session should go first, with some exceptions. Look, if we are lucky enough to get the commanding officers of our precinct and they're time limited, then they, I think, could be able to get up and deliver a message. If Congressman Nadler happened to get up, and if they're really limited, maybe we could make some exceptions. But I think, other than that, business session first, public second.
Very good. Cindy, yours, and then I'm going to close this off.
Yeah, I agree also, except for I just want to say in response to Rich's point about judging whether certain members of the public are sort of more worthy than others of going before the business session. I think that's not probably a good idea for you to get into the habit of judging who from the public has something more to say than others, or something more pressing to say. I would keep the public all together, but I do agree, precinct commanders, actual elected officials, those guys could, but I think you should have a bright line test. Don't make it subjective so that you're stuck deciding this is important, this is not important, because I don't think that's going to help the public's feeling about the community board, and I don't think it's necessarily fair.
Thanks. So obviously we're going to stick for another month with the business session first. We will continue to do that. We have had a fair bit of comment, obviously, and thank you for that, on what to do with the elected officials, especially. And so what I propose, and I would love to hear offline your comments, you don't have to respond right now. I think what I'm going to say is that the business session starts at 6:30, that comments from the general public are anticipated to start at 7:30, and that elected officials will be invited to speak at 8 o'clock. And I think we'll still be there. I would encourage all of us to still be there. I will again draft a memo to our elected officials. And if you want to share with me any point that you think I should include in my cheat sheet for elected officials about a topic that you do want to hear about, because you're going to hear a lot about the budget, especially in June, because we're either going to be at a city budget at that moment or very close to it, and there's going to be a lot of pain. maybe that's actually quite relevant to us. So I would welcome hearing from anybody who wants to share by email tomorrow or in the next few days the topics that you would like me to steer the elected officials toward. It has always been the practice of Community Board 7 to take elected officials, not their staff, but the elected officials whenever they join us. So if Congressman Nadler joins us in the middle of the business session, it would be my intention to interrupt, only because that's what we do. And I do think that one of the important functions that we provide is for the public to hear directly from their elected officials in person, live. It's not something that we get it's something that we get to do more than a lot of our neighbors and constituents. So it's a balancing act for sure. I'm not sure I'm going to put them on a timer, but I will push hard to make it circumspect. And I believe what I will do is reach out to each of their staff members and quietly say, it would be great if, and try that approach first. So that's a decision about the agenda order. There is the next question about voting procedures, and last month we did it by a show of hands, and I want to hear first from Sarah and Julian, our co-secretaries, about how did that work for you in terms of keeping track of the votes. It looked like your tally and my tally was the same, so there wasn't a lot of confusion. On the other hand, as Julian correctly pointed out during the meeting, there were more people present in the meeting than voting. And in theory, we're all supposed to vote when we're in the meeting. The roll call, of course, solves that problem, but takes time. So Julian and Sarah, first, tell me, if you would please, your impressions of how voting went last time, and then any suggestions you have, and then I'll open up the floor for a few minutes on that.
I'll defer to Julian because I was taking notes and he was counting votes.
Very good.
My experience was for the roll call, which Sarah actually did. So we had different experiences, but for the roll call, it was definitely more accurate. I mean, and that helped a lot. And for the last meeting, when we did the vote by counting hands, it wasn't aligned necessarily to how many people were present in the meeting. And I was also a little unsure at times if we had the vote counting. So it appeared correct, but because of the nature of Zoom and scrolling between screens, it's a little hard to tell. And our vote counts equaled out, but I think I would prefer the roll call vote, if not for if we have a lot of agenda items on the meeting. I think that can, if we have a lot of agenda items on the meeting, then that can, I think that is reason enough to maybe not do the roll call vote, because then you're pushing all the votes to the end of the meeting and people may forget stuff, and it can also take a long time. But I'm open to whatever option people think is best in terms of how easy the votes were to count. I think they're both doable for us as secretaries. So.
Okay, so what I propose that we comment on, oh, I'm sorry, Christian, you already had your hand up, so go ahead.
I prefer, especially if we have a good number of agenda items, to do a roll call vote at the end after we do all the presentations, and just do a roll call like we did 2 months ago. With a short agenda item, we could do one vote on each item as it proceeds, but I also prefer it to be by roll call rather than the other way.
All right, so how about we do a committee by committee roll call, so that, for example, I think there's only one, unfortunately, only one from BCI this month, only one from preservation, but we do one roll call at preservation, one call at BCI, one roll call at transportation, where I think there are several. But you do all the presentations for transportation, including the joint one with P&E, and then take a roll call at the end. So we'd be taking, I guess, 4 roll calls. That'll take some time, but we'll get good at it. Does that make sense to folks? I see Clary's hand, and then I'm not sure who else. Oh, Seema has her hand up too. So Clary and then Seema. Howard is putting his thumbs up, so I'm taking that as affirmative. And Meg Schmidt as well. But Clary, you're up.
Okay. So I wasn't going to say anything, but I heard, I guess it was Christian, say something favorable about what we had done the prior month, which was to take a roll call at the end on all resolutions at once, which to me was the worst of all worlds and really a mess and caused problems with people who were no longer there. And we know what the problems were. So I want to diss that option. The other thing, I think in theory, Mark, your suggestion that we do it by committee but basically bundled for each committee. I mean, my committee in Elizabeth has nothing this month, so it's not an issue for us. But I do know, again, as I said, while I was in favor of both resolutions that came out of the Transportation Committee, one of which was joint with the Parks and Preservation, I believe that there certainly was some opposition. I hope people change their minds. And I think that it, may be not more trouble than it's worth to bundle that committee, even though I hope both resolutions will pass.
So just to be clear, this is not a bundle.
No,
May I, please?
Sorry.
When you bundle a vote, you take one count and it applies to multiple resolutions. Here, you'll be called on once, but you may vote 3 times or 4 times. So you are perfectly welcome to say yes on number 1, no on number 2, abstain on number 3, and recuse on number 4 if that's how you're led to vote. This is not a bundling like sometimes BCI does with all the outdoor cafes into one vote. With that clarification, I'll take your suggestion. And I see I had Seema first, and then I have Susan, and then Jay.
So I'm definitely fine with the idea of bundling, but grouping by committee and doing a roll call vote then. But I have noticed on other Zoom calls that I've been on that there's often an option to poll the audience, and you can do votes that way. I don't know if our format allows that, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Unfortunately, it does not. The polling function is for the audience, not the panelists. If you think about what a normal webinar is, there's a panel of 4 or 5 experts and then an audience of 1,000. And the panelists want to know what the audience's experience is. So you're asking the audience to answer the poll. Unfortunately, that doesn't work with this setup.
Got it.
Rich and I tried that and ran aground on it.
Mark?
Yeah.
If I can interrupt, I do think that there is that capability of polling both panelists and attendees. We would have to then filter out any attendees who voted when they shouldn't have. So it is something we might test again to see if we can make it work.
All right, then I'll tell you what, if you're so led to try to do that, with one of the committees, we will try that. But I don't want the secretaries to have to parse in the middle of a meeting whether or not somebody who cast a vote is entitled to vote, because one of our obligations is, to the best of our ability, to announce whether or not a resolution passed during the meeting. And if there's an ambiguity about who is eligible to vote, especially if we're receiving votes from people who are on the telephone and we're not quite sure who they are, I want to be very careful about that. So let's give that one, we'll give that one experimental try and then do the committee by committee roll call after that is my proposal. Susan, you have the floor next, and I think Jay was after that, and now I see Ken.
Thanks, Mark. I'm actually more in favor of doing resolution by resolution roll call. I think it's the most accurate and most appropriate way to let the community know what we're doing, because they may or may not be following along and may or may not remember, which item is which. And some of these items are really important. As I look at the agenda for this coming month,
I'd like to think all of them are actually, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. Controversial is the word I guess I was looking for. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mark. I totally take that back. I'll do the Joey Chandler or the Friends thing where I rub and take it back. But for transportation is the only committee, it looks like it has more than one item. And so for just that one, it seems to me like it wouldn't be a real hardship to do 4 roll calls. That's just my feeling on it.
All right, let's see what the other folks are saying, and then we'll come to a conclusion. Let me see, Jay, were you next? Yes, and then do I have Ken, and I'll look for physical hands after that.
Mark, my instinct tells me that when you take a roll call, you start out by knowing the number of eligible voters, certainly at the full board. That if you called on the noes and abstentions and disqualifications first and just subtracted it, most of these non-controversial resolutions are overwhelmingly yeses, and you wouldn't have to count them. If you have 32 members and you have 2 noes and 1 abstention, you're done.
As a practical matter, I'm sure that's correct. I am concerned about the coercive nature of assuming a yes vote unless said otherwise. That troubles me a little bit. Ken, you're next.
Yeah, I just think that if we want to run the meeting as quickly and as efficiently as possible, having one roll call at the end is the way to do it. Multiple roll calls is inevitably going to get bogged down. I think the reason it didn't work in April was because it was at the end of the evening as well as the end of the meeting. This time, it's not going to be the end of the evening. I think we would expect all members to be there. I'd like us to give that another try.
Okay, very good. I don't see any other hands, and I'm not seeing any physical hands. Shelley, you usually raise your physical hand.
They
So
have to learn how to count.
not sure if,
This is a good time to do a poll.
oh, is it 7 o'clock? Okay, it's time for the, yeah. I actually can't clap with my hand brace on, so somebody clap for me.
The 800-pound gorilla in the room, Mark, is what happened.
I don't want to make it all about me. Give me 1 second here. I've just lost my screen. Give me 1 second here.
You should see the other guy.
Thank you. That was what I was looking for.
Mark, is it true you got in a fight with Penny?
I guess the joke I'm going to go with is I told Zorro a simple Z would suffice, but he wasn't satisfied. Bicycle crash, once again trying to avoid somebody doing something stupid on the bikeway, and I went over the handlebars instead. Happy to talk offline about the rest of it. Sorry about the gruesome image that you have to bear with. That'll probably help me make this a short meeting. Okay, so any other comments before we close the issue? Oh, for heaven's sakes, this is just going a little crazy here with the screen, enter full screen. I don't want full screen. No, I don't want to cancel recording. What the hell is going on with this thing tonight? Hang on. There we go, almost. Oh, for heaven's sakes. All right, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with Zoom. Bear with me, because I've lost the participant panel. Oh, for heaven's sakes, what the hell is this? All right. Well, I've lost participants, but let's soldier on, okay? I think what I'm inclined to do is the following, but we'll announce the final at the beginning of the meeting. We'll obviously have the business session first. We will try one poll with Rich's proposal or idea about how to do that. And then my current thinking is one roll call per committee, except that there's one transportation resolution that strikes me as it might attract more comment and attention than others. So I might propose to do a separate roll call for that one. That's the joint one with Parks and Environment. But I will ponder that and give everybody a chance to think about that as well. Okay, moving our agenda here. And the next is just a quick note of thanks. In our steering committee last month, I asked all of the committee chairs to please both get their agenda items for the May meetings in a timely way, and to put onto their agendas the item of planning future agendas. And I've seen great compliance with that. So the only agenda item here is thanks. That's great. The public has already noticed, and it will continue to be a good thing if we can keep this up. Is there anybody that has a concern or question about that? Otherwise, I'll move along. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm moving along. The next item is timely submissions of resolutions and minutes. Obviously, there are a couple of committees that haven't met yet, so even though I'm sometimes tempted to write the minutes before the meeting, those will have to wait. But please get them to Penny, if at all possible, by Wednesday of the week before full board, so that they have time. It is hard enough to get our full board materials together, to get them together remotely when you can't even walk into the office of the person next to you to talk about them. It requires additional levels of coordination. So let's please be careful about that. An announcement, and Danny O'Donnell mentioned this today. Madeline, are you still with us? There's Madeline. I'm unmuting you. And I believe you got the same announcement that I did. Madeline, you want to go take it away?
Probably so. Well, Danny just called me about an hour ago, and he said the governor was going to announce doing testing. But I want to tell a backstory on that. I was on a Zoom meeting with 3 Parks, and I was trying to ask Danny to get a testing in Douglas, and he said he didn't know how to work Zoom, so he couldn't answer me. But he did call me back today, and he said that they're going to be probably on 96. They're not sure the actual physical address, but that's so important to NYCHA residents here. So I don't know what you heard, Mark.
I heard that it's 96th in Amsterdam, that it'll be testing both for the live virus and for antibodies, that it'll be in a doctor's office somewhere at 96th in Amsterdam, but I'm not sure. There's a church on one corner, a school on another. And then there's that big building that we were actually involved in the renovation of on the southeast corner. So my guess is it's in that building, but it's somewhere on that block. And this is a block away from Park West Village and 4 blocks from the beginning of Douglas Houses. That's as good as we've heard, because up until now, the nearest testing site has either been in Washington Heights or over at Metropolitan Hospital on the east side. So this is a big improvement, yes?
But my concerns about that also is, Danny was saying that to let people know, it's going to be hard for me to notify residents that are stuck in their apartment. So I'm hoping it'd be a more visible or TV or whatever. He didn't say how it's going to be announced.
So I've asked Gabriel Lowenstein, is the chief of staff for Danny O'Donnell. Whoops. I'm sorry, somebody mute, please. Thank you. So I've asked Gabriel Lowenstein to share with us. They believe that they'll have a flyer tomorrow. And I will share that with you, Madeline. So you can email it to your network. We will send it out by our e-blast as well. Christian, you have your hand up.
Yes, Broadway and 100th Street, the urgent care, there is a testing site. CD Med on 104th and Broadway is another testing site. And 96 and Amsterdam could be the CVS.
It could be the CVS. I think the other two you have to pay for. That's the difference, I think.
87th and Broadway, City MD is also testing. I think actually, well, there's a partnership with City MD now. And
all CDMDs are testing sites.
Yeah.
Urgent care on 102nd and Broadway, you can pay, or if you have insurance, they'll take it.
Right. But I think they don't take. I think the difference with what Madeline was announcing is that you don't have to pay.
Right, which is better, of course.
Right, and it's going to be important for some folks. Okay, unless there are any other hands, and I don't see any other hands raised, let's keep moving. In terms of the June full board agenda, we've already heard, but I welcome additional comment on that the transportation joint with P&E might be a topic of some controversy or some significant comment. So I welcome anybody who wants to chime in, no particular order here, on what you all think will be controversial or require some meeting management techniques. I see Barbara's physical hand raised, and then we can go from there. Barb, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. The agenda for the full board meeting was put online a few hours ago, and it seems to be missing that item altogether.
It's not missing, but it was not. If you look in your email, if you haven't recently, you will see from me an email that has the voted upon text of that resolution and the current title of that resolution as it will appear on the agenda.
What is the current title? I don't have it now.
It's in your email. So I just invite everybody to take a look at that.
My concern is that people who are interested in this issue, if they don't find it online, will not attend, won't be there.
The agenda will be updated tomorrow. Penny's on the line. I've already sent the corrected resolution to every board member, as well as not corrected resolution, because the resolution hasn't changed since it was voted upon at committee. That's why we went through that exercise of hashing out the language right there on the screen. And then the title is what was requested it should be. And it will remain that unless something happens at full board. So that's what's going to go on the agenda. It'll be fixed tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments either on that resolution or or any other issues that we see on the agenda?
Several of you individually.
Somebody please mute if you're not speaking publicly. And then I see Susan Schwartz's hand. Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, there's no resolution on the social distancing for parks and environments. I'm just curious how that will work in terms of the full board meeting.
What typically happens when the agenda is put together before a committee meets is that the items on the agenda are listed on the agenda for full board in case they produce a resolution. It's sort of like a way to put a holding spot. And since you didn't actually have a resolution, that will obviously be deleted from the final resolution that goes to the public. Thanks.
Never mind.
No, so I see Kay Carpin's hand. Go ahead, and then followed by Clary Newell.
We just, we're going to have one resolution for preservation on West River House.
Very good. We'll make sure that we include that. And I think, Kay, you sent that resolution to Penny today?
I sent her a note about it but I'll flesh it out.
Very good. Thank you. Clary, did you have something more? Got to unmute yourself.
I'm not sure if it's the time quite for this yet, Mark, but I think it fits in with what you had said earlier. Last night, Elizabeth and I at our committee, and many of our other members are on this meeting as well. We had a very good discussion on the suspension of composting by New York City Sanitation Department, and then a very good discussion with a lot of community participation on social distancing in our parks. We didn't anticipate having a resolution on either of those topics. We don't have a resolution on either of those topics. But if you find it appropriate, or if you still do, I think Elizabeth and I would like to give a very brief report at this meeting to our colleagues on, a couple of minutes about what those discussions were. And just as I was thinking about this, it might be appropriate for us to, say a couple words about those things at the full board meeting as well, even though we don't have a resolution, unless we just, unless there's so much going on that it's not a good use of our time.
Okay, so let's keep this to 5 minutes if we can, and go ahead right now and let's do it.
Elizabeth should do the one on the composting, I think, if she wants to.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
You're on.
Elizabeth, you're on, and you're muted.
Oh no, I'm just gonna say thanks, everyone. I have nothing to say other than I think we should do that if we have a few minutes to.
Oh, you mean
Elizabeth, we were suggesting that right now for a minute or two you talk about the composting thing from last night.
I mean, look, I wasn't prepared to talk about it at steering tonight, but I'm happy to. I mean, we had a really good discussion with DSNY about the costs and everything else. Again, I don't really feel comfortable tonight. I appreciate the chance. I just am not dealing with a lot tonight. So
no worries.
Maybe put it in an email and send it to the board, so people can read about it. But I think a lot of people who are on this call were at the meeting last night and they heard about it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, prefer not to do a summary.
Very good. And maybe we'll look for a chance to have a summary at full board. So if you could give that some thought, and we'll plan ahead for that. Clary, why don't you take it away on the other issue that you were.
Yeah, just quickly, we had put on the agenda a discussion of social distancing in our parks, because as probably everybody here knows, as the weather's gotten better and people are so tired of getting cooped up, and the only exercise many people can get outdoors is to be in Central Park or Riverside Park, or to some extent our other parks, and the playgrounds are closed and the dog runs are closed, and Fairway is a mess. So although some people regard Fairway as active sports when you're in there, but anyway, the discussion last night, we had a lot of community members, and we had quite a number of community members who had written to Mark or written to me or to Elizabeth in advance about concerns about what's going on in our parks. So I would say, while we talked about a lot of different specifics, several things were sort of forefront. One was several dog owners were arguing that it was unreasonable to keep dog runs still closed, and were arguing for the reopening of dog runs. And, you know, there was some discussion about that. We certainly did not decide to propose a resolution. And in general, I think we were and still are reluctant to try to micromanage how the Parks Department is dealing with social distancing issues, and all of that comes from on high. It's not the local park managers who make those decisions. The other things were there were quite a few people who were concerned about runners and to some extent cyclists who are using pathways in Riverside and Central Park without wearing masks. And more generally, there was quite a number of people who had that concern. I was certainly one of them. And more generally, I think the sentiment of quite a few people who spoke was that the enforcement that the police and PEP officers are doing, which is to go around giving some warnings and trying to educate people and handing out masks, has not been successful in getting a fairly large number of people to obey the mask requirement and the distance requirement. So there was kind of a frustration with the lack of success of enforcement, but again, we didn't have a resolution. Elizabeth, Mark, Cindy, anybody else who was there can, wants to add anything that was sort of central to the discussion.
I think that's pretty much it. So let's keep moving here.
Okay.
But I did see a hand raised I'm challenged right now because I can't see the panelist panel for reasons that are escaping me. But here we go. Let me try this. There we go. No, that's not it either. I think it's Penny who was raising her hand. So Penny, is that you on the phone? And did you want to make a comment?
It was, but the time has passed. So I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The screen betrayed me, and so I couldn't see the panelists and therefore didn't see the raised hand.
That's okay.
I apologize.
No problem.
Anything else on planning for the full board in June? And if not, then we're going to move the agenda. I don't see any other hands, so thanks. A quick note again on the district needs statement. Those involved in trivia competitions will note that it's exactly the same item as was on the April steering committee agenda, and it is equally relevant. We do still, despite everything that's happening and the predictions of dire gloom that are coming out of all of the budgeting offices that we know of, including our own council member Helen Rosenthal on the city budget negotiating team, promises there's going to be a lot of pain. It actually makes our work on the district needs statement and the statement of budget priorities, where, for example, the composting issue may find a home if the board is so led. That it is more, not less important. So I ask that every committee give thought this month and give action next month to what that district needs statement should say. And then the only other item I have is new business. Is Andrew Ridgey still with us? There you are. Can you unmute?
I'm unmuted.
All right. So one issue about new business, which we can't vote on tonight because of lack of notice, but was suggested is for our board to take some kind of action on, was an issue that Andrew has been at the forefront of for quite a while now. And it involves outdoor seating for restaurants when and if they're ever able to reopen. And this is a different issue than other potential uses of the sidewalk and other public spaces. And I'll butcher it, so I'm just going to shamelessly call on Andrew to please start the conversation on this, and then I have a thought or two, and perhaps you do too.
Great, thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. So really the issue at hand is how are we going to support our local restaurants through not only the immediate crisis, but really the mid and the long-term recovery. We haven't got an exact direction yet from the governor as far as when will restaurants be able to reopen. Once they are permitted to reopen, what are the requirements going to be? Are we going to have a 50% reduced occupancy, a 20% reduced occupancy? Presumably there'll be social distancing requirements in place. And we all know prior to this crisis, it was really difficult to be a small business owner in this city, and we had so many conversations about the vacant storefronts. So even if you were a busy restaurant at 100% capacity, it could be a challenge to not only survive but thrive. So if we have to reopen under some reduced occupancy indoors, we're going to need to be able to generate additional sales outdoors. So we are, through my organization, and I just published an op-ed with City Council Speaker Corey Johnson on this, trying to reimagine how do we temporarily reimagine public space to provide outdoor seating that's socially distanced, that meets all of the requirements to open it up for restaurants. Because if they're limited in the revenue they can generate indoors, they're going to have to generate it outdoors. So we're trying to work with community boards, business improvement districts, elected officials, the business community, block associations to identify areas in different neighborhoods throughout the 5 boroughs where we could safely and efficiently set up outdoor seating. And that's everything from, extending the sidewalks into the streets to potentially closing streets. Stone Street in the financial district is an excellent example of where there's multiple restaurants where a street could be closed. Using pedestrian plazas. I've spoken with others even using, we don't have many parking lots in this neighborhood, but basically identifying different areas where we can encourage restaurants to set up in a safe way to generate revenue, and also bring a little bit of life back to the streets. I think part of getting back to a new normal is having some sort of street activity. So that's something that we're doing. If restaurants don't get outdoor space, it's going to be even more of a dire situation. And being on the community board, doing my work, speaking with so many different people, I'm a firm believer that there needs to be community input, and we need to try to make this work for as many people as possible, and considering all the different considerations. So that's somewhat of it in a nutshell. And we'd just love to have feedback, obviously, from our community on where these setups may make sense, how we can do it in an orderly way that does not create more problems or create, hurdles or bureaucracies for restaurants to even be able to set up outside.
Thank you. So I see a couple of hands raised. I'm going to ask a question first, bear with me, and then we'll get to everybody with the hands raised. I see Linda, Christian, Doug Kleiman, and maybe others, I'm not sure, and Sarah. But my question, Andrew, is based on an interview I saw with Danny Meyer, the restaurateur, Union Square Cafe, Shake Shack, and so forth, and with contacts I've had from local restaurateurs here in the Upper West Side, all of whom said that operating at 25 or even 50% capacity will not even approach breaking even. Is that your impression as well?
Yeah, so we surveyed about 500 restaurants, and more than 60% of them said they will need at least 70% occupancy to consider reopening. At anything less than 50, I mean, it was such a fraction, it's not even worth discussing. So, if the number was 70%, if we can find an additional 30% outside or whatever that number is, we need to try to get them as close to 100% using outdoor space.
Thanks, Andrew. I see a few hands here, so I'm just going to call on them in the order in which I've seen them. So that's Linda and Christian, Doug, Barbara, and Sarah, in something like that order. Everybody will talk. Linda, you're first. Go.
No, Andrew, you're done. I'm sorry. I just want, okay. We had our discussion at BCI last week, entailed the importance of bringing in the different regulatory agencies to discern how we can use the streets, which streets we can use, which side streets, et cetera, which areas that we can take, certain things away from on the side streets, et cetera, whether it's docking stations run on 84th Street, et cetera. But what we're going to try and do is work with the various regulatory agencies, DCA, DOB, and DOT, invite them to our next meeting so we can have this discussion, because that's the only way we're going to save the restaurants, by expanding the sidewalk cafes and the footprints of the sidewalk cafes. So that is the discussion. And Andrew, you weren't at that meeting, but it was right up your alley. And I think your participation is going to be critical in this one.
So I'm going to manage this a little bit, and I apologize for my voice, but here's the question that I want to put to both Linda and Andrew, which is that it's been suggested to me that we should be taking action on this at the June full board instead of the July full board. And that suggestion has come from a lot of different quarters, which would mean that we would, and I have responded to some of those folks who wanted us to pass a resolution tonight about that we absolutely need to notify the public of this conversation and to invite, of course, the regulatory agencies that Linda just talked about, as well as experts who might be able to inform our discussion in other ways. I would love for restaurateurs to be a part of that conversation, especially local ones. And so the only way I can see you doing that is to have a meeting next week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday in the evening, that we could give a week's notice to, and to try to attract the public to do that. What do we think about that? Is it crucial that we vote on this at June full board? I'm seeing some differing responses, but I'm putting the question first to Linda and then to Andrew, and then we'll keep going with the other hands that I see up.
I think it's critically important to have the regulatory agencies are the ones that are really, they're also, they're going to have a big influence on what the restaurants can do and not fine them. So not penalize them. So I think we can do it. Mark, I'm going to reach out to you, and between the two of us and with Penny, we could pull a group together. We just need representatives from 3 different agencies to have that discussion. And then, Andrew Ridgey, man. So we need to know your schedule too, because I know you're like, see what I can do.
Yeah, no, we can do the meeting. Yeah, I agree with that. I would add, without getting too much into the weeds of how the reopening, so restaurants are currently in the 3rd phase of reopening. If all of the health numbers and the 7 metrics are met, the soonest restaurants could potentially start reopening would be July 15th, I believe. So I think it is imperative, the sooner the better, because one of the big challenges here, this is complex, dealing with all these streets and all the moving parts, that we need to have kind of a system and criteria in place before restaurants start reopening. Because if we wait until then, August is going to come around and you're going to miss the summer. And if you would indulge me for 1 minute, Mark, the one other thing I didn't mention that I should have was,
by all means,
not only would this be incredibly helpful to the businesses, but I'm not a public health official, but what I've read and seen is that being in outdoor open air spaces perhaps is safer than being in an enclosed area. So in addition, just the consumer perception of being outdoors, I think people will be more comfortable going out with their family, with their friends, with their parents, if they are outdoors versus indoors. So I think that that's an important component of this as well. It's not just the economic issues, but perhaps there's public health implications too.
Great. And so to that end, one of the things that I anticipate is that if we are able to have this meeting and we are able to come to a resolution, it's not going to be a block by block prescription as to where public seating could be. That's beyond our pay grade and probably beyond our ability to do. It would probably be a more general statement of support for the idea, and maybe a few parameters, a few criteria, a few countervailing concerns relating to things like public transit and making sure that buses can still get through and ambulances can still get through, all the things we talked about a couple of months ago. And so the reason why I was persuaded to raise this tonight, just for everyone's benefit, is that if we come up with a resolution that says this is a great idea in principle, let's work on getting it in place, the people to whom we would make that statement would then need some time to be ready for whenever that reopening is. So if the reopening is, as Andrew was positing, say July 15th-ish, then we would want to be on record in the June full board meeting, not the July full board meeting. That's why I'm pushing this ahead. And so now with that said, I'm going to turn to Christian.
Very awesome.
I see you, Louisa, but I've got several folks ahead of you. I've got Christian, Doug Kleiman, Barbara Adler, Sarah Lind, and Louisa and Jay, I think.
Okay.
Could everybody who's not speaking please mute their microphones, because there's something going on here.
Okay, so as Linda said, we had discussed precisely this issue at the BCI meeting, and we were planning on getting the panel together. This just will gives us more urgency to do it. But part of the we do really need some of the regulatory agencies to be present, because we need to find out eventually what would be possible or not in terms of the suggestions we'll be making. We talked about different things like as some of the restaurants are used as side streets, sidewalk space on the side street, in addition to the front of the business. If they had an empty store next to theirs, maybe they could use that space also. And definitely the issue will be if they can use the street, that's better, but that's going to be the tricky one.
Thank you, Christian. I think I had Doug Kleiman next, followed by Barbara Adler. Doug, unmute and go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is a great idea, and obviously we want to support businesses to the extent that is practical. One other issue, and Andrew, we can talk offline about this, but I've been speaking with various retailers as well as restaurants. Spoke to, and this is not an official representation by Starbucks, but I spoke to a major representative of Starbucks who was discussing the possibility of some on their to-go orders having a sliding door, and the lineup would be very, and spaced out in a safe way, and they could bifurcate their stores so people didn't have to physically go into the store. And that particular representative, again, non-officially said to me that one of the issues is that there are restrictions, from landlords, but also even within an LPC district, that they would possibly want to pull out a window bay temporarily within a LPC district and be allowed to do it for a temporary period of time. And so this would probably work pretty well for a lot of the smaller operations, like Piccolo Cafe on 74th and Amsterdam does it. So that was just one. This may actually dovetail nicely with what Andrew was discussing. One question I had for Andrew was: are we talking about outdoor seating that is similar to a food court, where if we had a public plaza with safe distancing, people who are getting food from multiple different restaurants could sit in this area, or are these specifically designated on a per restaurant basis?
Good question. So all of the above. So there's examples. I don't have the screen share up now, but there's some good examples where you can actually build out into the street these platforms. I think there's been some discussion where you could allow the restaurant to serve directly in front of their restaurant, while leaving enough clearance in the sidewalk. You could also then use pedestrian plazas, sometimes where there are public tables and chairs that are available that could just be open to any restaurant in the area. There's also creative ideas. You may have seen Urban Space. They do the Holiday Market, Columbus Circle, Union Square. They have these prefabricated kiosks that actually have hand wash sinks and other things that meet the health department requirements. In theory, they could be located in certain areas where a restaurant could actually prep and serve some of their food outside. So I think it really comes down to us saying we are supportive of this concept, and we want to have the city and those decision makers to have the flexibility to figure what works, where, and how, and try to incorporate as many restaurants into this as possible, because there's just not going to be enough street space or sidewalk space, in front of every restaurant to do this. And we have bike lanes, and we have parking, and we have bus lanes, and we have emergency vehicles. So it's really going to have to be a little bit creative about how to fit it in. But there's a lot of different options and a lot of different solutions out there.
Yep. Great. Doug, is that good for you? If so, I'm going to move on to Barbara Adler.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk to Andrew. Yeah, I'll talk to Andrew offline about this. We can talk about the sliding door concept as it relates, and how it may help and keep people safe for small businesses, medium and large.
Very good. Thanks. Barbara, you're up.
Okay, yeah, well, of course, I support this 1,000%. And I've already given it a lot of thought. And whereas I think Amsterdam and Broadway would be much easier to take some of the space from the street as is needed to create these kiosks or platforms or whatever is needed. I think we should try to think in advance about what happens to poor Columbus Avenue, which has so many restaurants on it all the way up and down. And it has a bus lane on one side and it has a bike lane on the other. And I haven't been able to come up with the idea, but I'm sure somebody else can figure it out. Of course, DOT will have the final say, but we're going to have to do something to accommodate those people. You might remember that Jeremy Wilatis, who owns 3 restaurants on Columbus, came to our BCI meeting this past month and was pleading with us to do something, or he's going to have to close those restaurants permanently, as I'm sure many other restaurateurs will as well. So anyway, that's
Well, we're working with a couple of different architects, and they're kind of, again, reimagining of how this could be done, and then they could definitely take a look at specific areas. And the one thing that I say, this is about like the future of all small businesses, which really means to me the future of our city. And everyone's going to have to compromise a little bit to get through this. And I think those compromises will be well worth it. And I think if we really start seeing these renderings of what it could look like, I think it would be really exciting. And I think just after all of this and everyone's been cooped up, once we can get out in a safe way to actually see these businesses out there opening, I think everyone will be really, really happy about it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move us along a little bit. I see Sarah, I've got Jay, and Louisa, you also wanted to speak, yes? Yes, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I strongly support this. This is something actually at the Broadway Task Force we've been talking about for some time now. There's the concept of the street seats that Andrew mentioned. Platforms out into the street is something that is already in use around the city and has been for years in certain areas, and they're great, and it's a great opportunity for the restaurants. So I think that we definitely can get creative, and I think it's exciting. I just wanted to say, if we can't, I think it's really important that we do this before the June full board. So I would urge that even if we can't get all the regulatory agencies that we'd like to there for a discussion, that we should move forward with it. And just as Andrew said, what we really want is just a resolution that shows our support, and then we can let the agencies be flexible and figure it out. We don't have to answer all the questions by our June full board. We can keep having the discussion, but let's move forward.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to call on Jay and then Louisa, and then I understand Rich Robbins has his hand up. Unfortunately, he's not on my screen, so forgive me for not seeing you before now. Jay, you're up, then Louisa, then Rich.
Just very quickly, I agree we need to do this at the June meeting. I would ask anybody else who's in line to speak with specific suggestions, that they save them for a meeting of some sort between now and the June meeting, and that Andrew and Linda and you, Mark, coordinate a meeting which doesn't, any member or group of members can introduce a resolution at a full board meeting. So you guys should get together, decide on as much detail as you think you can, and then present a resolution at the June meeting, rather than continue a discussion now of each suggestion that somebody might have in their mind. Save that for the full board meeting, or for an ad hoc meeting, if you will, that you guys can call, get whoever you can there that you think is important, formulate a resolution and get it before the board.
Very good, thank you. So Louisa and then Rich.
Okay, this is procedural. You should have city planning there, because the locational requirements for restaurants particularly are in the zoning resolution. The other thing is to bring in someone from Corey Johnson's office. You're going to need an override from the city council and the mayor, because otherwise the changes in the regulations can't go they just won't go fast enough. There has to be a special override.
That's helpful. Thank you. So if nothing else, Linda, please. So I think that's good advice, but perhaps that is just drafting for our resolution about to whom. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Corey is already on, like he's my best friend, sorry. The speaker is already on board with this general concept, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, Andrew, you mentioned that you co-authored an op-ed with him, right?
Yes.
So I'm guessing
committed
he's
to
put his name to it, then we can count on that. But Louisa, you're right. We should speak to that in our resolution, and if at all possible, get an expert on an expert other than you on zoning and land use to speak to that.
Yeah, what is it that they are prepared to do from their end?
Well,
would be interesting to know.
It would be interesting to know, and I take your point, and perhaps we will, no, not perhaps, we will try to do that. I don't think the absence of that person will affect the outcome. It may affect the content of our resolution in that we may call on them to do certain things rather than have their pre-agreement to do them. That's the best I can offer. Rich Robbins had his hand up, and then I'll go back to Linda if there's more to clean up.
Yeah, I was just going to say we started getting pretty deep into the specifics, and we had said we weren't going to just because we haven't noticed this. I do think it would be worthwhile to do a meeting next week that we can notice, and then we can talk at more detail, and we've given proper notice. It does seem that there is pretty broad support, which is great. One comment for Andrew is since your article was paywalled, I'd recommend you email it to the entire board because it was a great article.
I thought I sent it out earlier, but yeah, we can do that.
Please do. I'm looking at Thursday, the 28th. Does that work for the folks who are interested in this issue? Linda, go ahead. Got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was thinking more Wednesday, the 27th, and get it going quickly. I think we have enough time, Mark, between tomorrow is Wednesday, between Wednesday and Thursday. We just need representatives from DOB. City planning is not a bad idea, but I think it's going to start to get really mixed up, Louisa. My inclination is to get the regulatory agencies right now, because those that are having the direct impact on what we can do with the streets, they're the ones who are also finding the restaurateurs. So let's get that going. We get the representatives, and at least, you know, from 3 agencies, and then maybe 4 city planning, and then have the discussion with BCI. Of course, everybody is welcome to join us. I defer to my co-chair. Christian, is this okay with you?
Oh, that's fine. We can finalize the list of who we invite later on, but definitely yes.
Let's talk to let's the 3 of us, or maybe more, talk tomorrow.
Let's do it.
And my suggestion to Louisa's point is that if we can't get city planning to join us, maybe we can get our liaison for land use from the borough president's office. Not who couldn't speak for the agency, but at least is an expert on the subject. That might be useful. Are there any other comments or hands to raise on this? If not, I think I see Shelley, and then I'm going to page through, and I see Howard with hands raised. So Shelley first, then Howard, and we're looking at the 27th in the evening for this meeting, subject, of course, to the availability of our experts. Go ahead,
if it's
Shelley
Wednesday,
first, Howard.
If it's Wednesday, there's no problem. Thursday night is a serious religious holiday, Jewish religion.
Then it looks like Wednesday, doesn't it? Okay, then we're going to have to force the issue on our representatives from those agencies. Howard, you're up.
Mark, could this be a meeting of the steering committee? Because this topic really transcends so many of the committees. Each committee, I think almost each committee has a significant interest in this. So could it be characterized as a steering committee or as a?
Well, here's the thing. I don't care if we call this the ad hoc committee to save our restaurants. I want to make sure we have a quorum. Because we can't pass we can formulate a resolution, but it would be better if there were a quorum of some committee that could then refer it as an approved resolution to the full board, rather than just, as I think Jay was saying, a call up from an individual member. It does carry a little bit of different weight. So here's the challenge to everybody on this call. If you would prefer this to be a steering committee meeting, then I need to hear from you by noon tomorrow, that by email is fine, that you are committing one representative of your committee to be present for a quorum. Otherwise, I think this is going to be a BCI meeting. Okay.
Mark, I have to interject. I can't stress enough that this is a BCI meeting that, of course, everyone would be invited to. So you could vote as a non-committee member, but it's got to be a BCI meeting because it's a BCI issue. And when we're voting members from other committees, transportation, I can see where you would find that relevant. Definitely you're invited, but it's a BCI issue. And if we have too many cooks and too many chefs in this kitchen, we're not going to get anything done.
Okay,
So-
so
Fine.
Linda, so I'm sorry, I'll
fine.
take that. And if everybody could mute if they're not talking. Linda, so then please, if you would, by tomorrow at noon or so, would you please poll your committee to make sure that you can get a quorum of BCI there? Because my first and most important issue is that we have a quorum of some committee so that this is an approved resolution when it hits the full board agenda. And if it has to be YEL, then it's YEL.
Mark, I'll send a poll tomorrow to BCI. I'm pretty sure that we will get a quorum there.
Very good. I see Paige has her physical hand raised. Paige, you want in on this? Let me try to unmute you. You're unmuted. Go ahead. Paige Kelly.
Our land use meeting is tomorrow evening. We do have a guest speaker. I think that most of the people who will be chiming in tomorrow, it would be very easy for us to take Louisa's offer and we can start the process by putting together a resolution tomorrow so that by next week we have something that you can work with on the 27th. Because our land use meeting is tomorrow night, if that helps.
Thanks. I think that we're better off with the idea of a meeting the following week. If you have thoughts on a resolution, that would be wonderful to have that spade work, especially from the perspective of the land use issues that will inevitably be raised by this. But we need to give notice to the public and give notice to the agencies that Linda in particular was calling out as necessary to the conversation in order to have a good full airing of this. And quite frankly, I'm going to be reaching out personally to some of the folks from whom we heard about parking issues, because to the extent that any of this relates to parking, I don't want anybody surprised by this. We want to make sure that the public has every intention of, or rather every opportunity of being heard on this. My hope is that everyone in our community will see the need for the role of reviving our restaurants and other small businesses as part of our overall recovery. But everybody should have the opportunity to speak. So by all means, do whatever spade work you think you can do tomorrow. But I think that the approach is to make sure that the conversation happens the following week with proper notice.
Just so you know, Parsons has already done a study of using the streets and making platforms. So their precedents and their prototypes already out there. So if
Fantastic.
we can pull that
Do you have-
together, we'll pass it on to the relevant committees.
That would be great. If I could put the burden on Andrew Ridgey to receive that as first vice chair and as in his expertise. And if you would copy me just so I try to come up to speed on this, but I defer to the experts. So
No
it sounds like Wednesday, the 27th, we're going to shoot for a meeting. We're going to push to have a committee of a committee quorum. And we're going to have a good discussion on this with experts. I see Rich's hand, and then we're going to wrap this up, I think. Rich, take it away.
Yeah,
And then Louisa.
I'm just thinking it should be a joint meeting because any use of sidewalks or streets is a transportation issue. So by making it BCI and not transportation, it means that transportation committee members would not be able to vote on the issue and have that count towards the resolution. It's a joint issue.
It is a joint issue. My concern is quorum. And my other concern is I would love, this is a resolution I don't want our board to pass 26 to 24. We have to do this right. And I'm hoping for practically an acclamation voice vote. So the most important aspect of this is to get it onto the June full board agenda. I will talk offline with Linda and with Christian about how to make sure that we get this on the June agenda. And I'll talk with Howard and Meg about that as well, and anybody else who wants in. We got a lot of work to do in a short period of time. I would like not to have to, I would like to be efficient about that, and this is how I'm approaching that. Louisa, it looks like you might just get the last word on this.
Okay, as Paige mentioned, there's going to be a joint housing and land use meeting tomorrow night, and it's going to be very, very interesting. We're having a speaker from RPA, the Regional Plan Association, who they have a plan to build market rate housing in the middle of NYCHA, presumably to support NYCHA. We'd like to hear about this. We'd like to hear about it. The other item that's on the agenda is the new building being proposed at 96th Street and Broadway. on the
Not
south,
on Broadway, between Broadway and West End Avenue.
no, on the corner. We looked it up.
Yeah, there are two. You're correct, Louisa. Go ahead.
Okay, it's on the southwest corner. It's going to be huge. They're going in for inclusionary housing, but they're only going to put one affordable housing unit in this building. It also cantilevers over the building next to it. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of issues that are arising. So I want to let everyone know about this in case you would like to sit in on the meeting.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a great meeting. In fairness, Louisa, this is the old inclusionary housing program, not the mandatory inclusionary housing program.
Right, we
that
don't
some
have
of us
MIH.
Right, we do not. You're correct that there's one, count them, one affordable housing unit in the building, but my understanding is that we'll hear about a proposal to rescue some number of other affordable housing units at some other site within our district. And I don't want to prejudge what that is, but I understand that there's more than just one unit total in the proposal, just that there's only one of them in the building. And quite frankly, I don't know why they bothered, but we'll find out that too, right? So thank you for that preview. Shelley, are you?
Yeah, that is correct. What you said, I've heard from three sources.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm scrolling to see if there are any more hands, physical or otherwise. Kay, was that a hand or is that just a, I'm ready to go home? Okay.
Mine is up, Mark. Clary.
Say again?
It's Clary, mine is up.
Your hand is up. I don't see it, but now I do. Okay, go ahead, Clary.
Okay.
Sorry, Louisa, you're not going to get the last word. Clary's going to take it away.
Or maybe I won't. Just quickly on what we were just talking about next week's meeting, I'm fine with the 27th. I think you will find a very substantial participation, Mark, among all the board, because after all, where else do we have to go and what else do we have to do that night? So we're getting pretty good. We're getting pretty good attendance. But I do agree that it should be a steering committee meeting, and because it's not just, and certainly I respect what Linda and Christian have said. Yeah, it's definitely BCI issues, it's definitely transportation issues, but it's also definitely land use issues. And it's definitely parks and environment issues, because we're talking about public plazas. We're talking about what happens with all the garbage in this increased space. We're talking about rats, that's all parks and environment. And for that matter, it's also preservation, because I quaked when Andrew said something about temporary changes in the facades of landmarks, because believe me, once you knock out masonry, you're not putting it back readily. And so even the Preservation Committee, I think, is implicated in, and although they would speak for themselves when we get there. So I think it should be steering, and I don't think you're gonna have any problem getting the attendance.
Okay, so I will renew my challenge. If I don't get confirmation that I'll have a quorum of steering by noon tomorrow, then it's going to be BCI. And even if I do have that, I will still confer with Linda, Christian, Howard, and Meg on those issues. Because here's the thing. This is one of those resolutions where I'm hopeful that it doesn't matter where it came from. It matters what our full board says and how loudly we say it. This is something that I'm hoping for, like I said, an acclamation voice vote at the end of the presentation, where we can say that CB7 stands shoulder to shoulder behind our small businesses, not just in words, but in calling on our civic officials to put into action a plan to make sure that the recovery from this shutdown is real and not just hypothetical. So let's approach all of this from that point of view. And now I see Linda's hand, and then really, this is going to be the last word.
Okay, Clary, I can't tell you how much I don't agree. It should be a steering committee meeting. I really do think that everybody's invited, but BCI should take the lead because it has very specifically to do with restaurants.
Okay, and, you know what? We've all been through all. I'm going to say thanks very much to that. We get it. I think there's been a lot of good thoughts raised. One way or another, we're going to have a meeting next Wednesday. I hope that everyone's there, and we will absolutely record all votes, but having a quorum is my concern, and that's what I get paid extra for. So let's make sure. Okay, so I think that with that, unless there are any other thoughts, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn
Motion
and
to
ask for
adjourn.
unanimous consent. I see Rich Robbins is moving, and without objection, Shelley is
Seconded.
seconding.
I want to talk.
Oh, you want to talk? Okay,
Yeah.
Rich, go ahead.
Just as a test, and I put this in chat, I tried out an election software, and there's a limit of 20 people that can be done in a free account. So I emailed it to 20 people. I made a fake election, set a deadline of 9 o'clock tonight. If people can just look at their email and test it out and see what your thoughts are. I put in the chat what the password is, which is CB7, capital C, capital B, 7, capital C, capital B, 7. And that can be individualized if we want. I saw a few people, Seema and a few others that have tried it. Seema said she liked it. So if people could test it out and just see if this might be something that's worth doing.
Let's talk offline about that, Rich. My only concern with that is to make sure that we know who voted and who didn't, and to make sure that those who did vote were entitled to. But let's talk about that offline. I'm actually
And
reading the chat
conversely,
first.
people who don't have technical issues that prevented them from voting.
Okay. Yeah, well,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
there are some of those too. I see in the chat that there's Julia King or Quing Reeves, pardon my butchering your name, and it relates to running for elected office. Our chat and our meetings are not a place for political campaigning. We welcome you to any political dialogue that you want to take part in, but this is not the place for campaigning. So I thank you for being with us, but we're not equipped to handle that sort of thing. And with
Motion
that,
to adjourn.
we're going back to adjourning, and this time I'm going to hold you to it.
No, motion to adjourn.
Stephen Brown is voting yes. Very good. Thank you all. You'll be hearing from all of us shortly about how to get this moving. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.